My name is Sander and I'm a big fan of coffee, cocoa and the climate. And since you're watching, I'm gonna bet that you are too. When you're like us, you love talking about how we can produce the products we all love so much while benefiting all the people in the supply chain and while remaining within our planetary boundaries. This is the Carblecast. Let's dig in. If you're like me and you read a lot of news, then you've come across plenty of announcements of companies in the coffee, cocoa, tea and rubber space sharing ambitious new climate goals. And we all know it's extremely important that we meet these goals. The Paris Climate Agreement says that in order to avert the worst effects of climate change, we're going to have to reach net zero planetary emissions by 2050. This also means that we cannot continue to allocate unlimited natural resources to a product that hardly has any nutritional value. Because I want to make sure that I can enjoy my cup of coffee in 2050, I ask myself the question, how can we make sure that commodities like coffee and cocoa have a net positive impact on our environment? Let's use coffee as an example. The production of a bag of coffee emits carbon because of packaging, because of transport, because of roasting and grinding. But more than 70% is typically emitted due to land use change, which is another word for deforestation in the supply chain. Deforestation is a much bigger problem than I myself was aware of when I started on this journey. Deforestation is responsible for emitting 5 gigatons of carbon every year, which is 5 times as much as the entire aviation sector and almost 10% of our global emissions. So clearly, if as an industry we want to produce net positive commodities, deforestation should be the first thing we focus on. Before we go there, let's have a look at how deforestation is typically accounted for in a company's carbon footprint calculations. The IPCC, the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, identifies 3 tiers of accuracy. Tier 1 methods are the most simplified calculations and they're based on global estimates of carbon emissions. Tier 2 methods have intermediate complexity and they involve country or region averages of carbon emissions. And Tier 3 measurements have the highest accuracy and they require traceability all the way to the individual farms to calculate actual emissions from tropical deforestation. From our work, what we've seen is that these Tier 3 measurements usually show much higher emissions than Tier 1 or Tier 2 calculations. Now, of course, none of this would make sense if companies could deforest one year and not have to account for the emissions from deforestation next year. This means that also historical emissions over a period of 20 years have to be included in a company's greenhouse gas disclosures using what is called a linear discount method. Okay, zoom out. We've established our carbon footprint and we've set goals to reduce it. But how do we actually become net positive? In order to answer that question, we first have to look at how coffee is produced around the world. Traditionally, coffee and other commodities like cocoa as well are produced in agroforestry, which means under the shade of the natural forest canopy. This comes with huge benefits in terms of carbon storage, but also biodiversity, and even the quality of the coffee grown in agroforestry is better. However, since farmers don't get rewarded for all the services that they deliver to the ecosystem, the amount of coffee grown under shade reduces year after year after year, resulting in massive carbon emissions. Coffee and cocoa farmers in almost all countries earn less than a living income, which means less than what you need to provide a decent standard of living for your family. And we cannot expect anybody to look after the environment when they're not able to feed their kids, have a roof above their head, or go to the doctor when they're sick. In my opinion, since carbon from deforestation enters the atmosphere almost immediately, the highest priority on the road to net positive tropical commodities is to prevent deforestation and to prevent the degradation of the forest canopies. And I think the only way of doing this is rewarding farmers for keeping carbon stored safely in their farms. After that, when we've made sure that there's no deforestation or forest degradation in our supply chains, we can start looking at reforestation, supporting farmers as they transition to more regenerative farming practices and plant new shade trees. These trees will take 20 or 30 years to grow and absorb all that carbon back from the atmosphere, but they can actually absorb more carbon than what is emitted throughout the production process, resulting in net positive commodities. So my conclusion is that if we want to drink coffee in 2050, it has to be net positive coffee. And if we want coffee to be net positive, it has to emit less carbon than what is removed in the supply chain. And the only way that we can do that is, first of all, making sure that it's economically viable for the farmers to grow coffee in an environmentally sustainable way. And we can do that by preventing deforestation, rewarding farmers for carbon storage, and supporting them financially as they transition to regenerative farming practices. Only that way we can make sure that coffee can benefit all the people in the supply chain while remaining within our planetary boundaries. Alright folks, that's all for today. I would love to hear your thoughts and hear how you see the road to net positive tropical commodities. If you have any thoughts, please comment. You can follow us on LinkedIn or find us at Carble.co.